This is Research Like a Pro, episode 396. Love County, Oklahoma, walking in the footsteps of Richard and Nancy Frazier. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the authors of Research Like a Pro, a genealogist guide. With Robin Worthland, they also co-authored the companion volume, Research Like a Pro with DNA. Join Diana and Nicole as they discuss how to stay organized, make progress in their research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go! Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com. Hello, welcome to Research Like a Pro today. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Nicole. How is it going today?
It's going well. I've been transcribing land patents, and I ordered the application for a preemption land. I don't know what to call it, but it was a preemption one. So I'm hoping there will be some witness statements in the application file.
Oh, that's so fun to get those. What year was it?
In the 1840s.
Well, that might be good. My Thomas B. Royson's preemption had 2 witness statements, as you remember, that were just the same, that were good. So that's exciting. It's always so fun to get those back. And I think even if they don't have witness statements, you get receipts and you get the actual application documents, which is really great.
Yeah, I think it'll be neat. I ordered that yesterday for my 14-day challenge project on Alexander Keaton and if he's the son of Ephraim Keaton.
Very nice. Well, speaking of 14-day challenge, I've been working on mine as well, and I had a fun objective, and that was to discover something about Samuel Daniel, who was the man who placed the advertisement for John Royston Runaway Apprentice in 1770. So I just found a day or two ago, and I'm excited to get back to the research, a run of court records between Samuel Daniel and Richard Wyatt Royston and John Royston. So this was a couple years after, and I have not got everything transcribed and in order. So I'm excited to get all the records and then to start putting together the pieces of the puzzle here. So
Oh my
anyway,
gosh.
it's so fun.
So you hadn't seen these court records because they are in the county where Samuel Daniel lived?
Right. They're in Middlesex County. Gloucester County, where the Roystons lived, had severe record loss, so there are no records for this era. But Middlesex didn't have any record loss because apparently the clerk went and hid them, when the British were coming or whatever situation. So there's plenty of records, and full text search found a ton on Samuel Daniel. So I'm not going to look at all of them. I'm just going to focus in on the Roystons and him.
Well, perfect. I mean,
Yeah.
that is just such a great poster child story for fan club research.
It is, absolutely. I could have done this years ago if I had thought about it, but I never thought about it. So I'm excited. And I did find that the vestry book there for the parish, it was called Christ Church Parish there in Middlesex County, and they have a lot of records. So there was a birth record for Samuel Daniel, I believe it was 1720s, which puts him, makes it so that he would have been in his probably early 40s, late 30s when he placed that advertisement. Or apprentice John Royston, which makes sense, just right in the prime of his working years. And there was only one Samuel Daniel that I've been able to see. So I think I've identified the correct person.
That's convenient.
That there weren't a whole bunch. There's a lot of Daniels in the county. So this family's been there for a long time. But only one Samuel that I can tell. So we'll see.
I love this project. How fun.
Kind of fun to just go venture off and do something totally different, isn't it? And I love that for these 14-day challenges. Something a little bit smaller than breaking through your brick wall, something that you haven't researched before, so you actually can find a lot of fun, interesting records because you haven't exhausted them all already. So right. I like it. I'm having fun.
Fan club research has never been easier now that full text search makes it so easy to just find these kind of court records and things that we may not have ever been able to find before.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I know you didn't have 2 Samuel Daniels, but if you had, you would have been a good candidate for the Merging and Separating Identities course. I know many of you out there have that problem. Let me tell you more about the course. This is part of our Research Like a Pro Institute. And imagine finally proving which of 4 possible fathers belongs to your ancestor after years of being stuck. That's what genealogist participants learned to do in Jan Joyce's course, Merging and Separating Identities. This isn't your typical Genealogy Institute course. Over a multi-week course, you'll tackle the field's toughest challenge, distinguishing between people who share names, places, or both. Jan has a great team of expert instructors: Kristen Britannic, myself, Nicole Dyer, Patty Hobbs, Lynn Nelson, and Kim Richardson. Together, they bring decades of experience in solving complex identity cases. You'll master identity dossiers that organize every piece of evidence, learn when to merge records and when to separate them, and discover correlation techniques that reveal hidden connections. Work through real-world case studies, including DNA strategies, mapping tools, and even AI applications. Plus, you'll practice on a specially curated data set with expert guidance every step of the way. Spots will fill up fast for this unique course. Visit the Family Locket website and click on Shop, then Institute Courses to learn more and register for this dynamic Merging and Separating Identities course and finally break through those identity roadblocks. This course will be on Thursdays from April 30th through June 11th at 9 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. each Thursday. So we're really looking forward to that, and it's such a needed course for anyone struggling with how to manage and track those challenging identity cases. Also coming up is our Research Like a Pro webinar series for February. And the webinar for that month is going to be by Sunny Mohammed Boy. And Sunny is such a wonderful researcher. She has been in our Research Like a Pro with DNA study group. And she's going to be presenting something that she worked on in the study group called From Georgia to Florida, Reconstructing the Family of Seth Howard Through DNA and Historical Evidence. Seth Howard was born in 1804 in Georgia and migrated to the territory of Florida in 1816. He is a registered Florida pioneer with the Florida Genealogical Society and is well researched by professional genealogists. Yet the identity of his parents has never been discovered. Thorough analysis of the documentary evidence gathered from his adult life seemed to yield no clues to his parentage. This case study uses autosomal DNA cluster analysis along with pedigree triangulation as a lead toward possibly identifying his parents. Additional correlation of documentary evidence, geographical and historical context, and onomastic clues provides a compelling circumstantial case to support the report's conclusion. And Sunny will use a variety of tools, including DNA GEDCOM, clustering, Banyan DNA. She'll talk about pedigree collapse, pedigree triangulation, Georgia land lotteries, the Patriot War, frontier migration, tax records, and so forth. This is going to be a wonderful lecture, and we hope you can join us. You can still register for the 2026 webinar series at any time throughout the year, and that will give you access to each monthly lecture. So we're excited. Our next study group will begin in August of 2026. And so if you're thinking of joining us, that will be the Research Like a Pro study group. And peer group leader applications will be accepted on our website if you'd like to join us and receive complimentary registration. Also, don't forget to join our newsletter. It comes out every Monday and you get new content from us, from our videos, posts, podcast episodes, and things like that. We hope we'll see many of you at RootsTech on March 5th through 7th in Salt Lake City. We're both giving classes and we'll have an exhibitor booth. So we're looking forward to seeing you there. And we'll each be having one of our classes be online as well. So if you can't go in person, you'll be able to see one of the classes online.
Right. I'm so excited for Roots Tech. It's always fun. Such a great vibe there. For anyone who has never been, you just have to go at least once to try it out. It's so fun. And I'm glad that we're going to have some lectures online. That will be awesome. My negative evidence one will be recorded, and yours is DNA and AI, if I'm thinking correctly. Yep. Is that right?
That's right.
That's going to be awesome. Well, let's get to our topic of the day, which is talking all about visiting Love County, Oklahoma roots. So, Nicole, you went there in May, I believe. Was it May of last year? And I went in September.
Actually, I went in May of 2024.
Oh my goodness. So you'd gone a whole year before me. That's funny. The years go by, don't they? So I was excited to get to go and visit some of the same places that you did. We have these paternal lines that were all in Texas in the mid 1800s, and they all moved north to Indian Territory by 1900. And even though I had researched them all for 23 years and studied the records and histories and photographs, I really just wanted to go and see the land. I wanted to go where they lived. And so I was able to walk in the cemetery and visit the historical museum and drive through the countryside. And it really makes a difference. If you've been there, you can picture it when you're looking at the records and thinking about their lives. So it was just a neat experience. Well, my second great grandparents, Richard and Nancy Frazier, were in the Ozarks of Missouri and Arkansas from the time they were born until they left McDonald County, Missouri for Texas between 1876 and 1880. They had lived through the Civil War there in Missouri, which was awful, and Richard was a teamster for the Confederacy in Marmaduke's division for about 4 years. And although the 1863 courthouse was burned and destroyed their marriage record, Nancy, many, many years later, stated they were married in October of 1863, and that was on her widow's pension. Well, 1863, as you know, was the height of the Civil War, and in studying the Ozarks and the Civil War, I learned it was terrible guerrilla warfare. People basically fighting with their neighbors. Everything was in such an uproar. So, following the war, Nancy and Richard Frazier lived there for a little bit through Reconstruction in McDonald County, but they finally moved west to Cook County, Texas by 1880. And when settlers started moving north to Indian Territory, just a little bit after that in the 1880s and 1890s, Richard and Nancy, with their large family of many, many children, crossed the Red River from Texas into the Chickasaw Nation. And they settled in Burneyville by about 1892. And I had always wondered when they went because we're missing the 1890 census. And in 1880, they're in Texas, 1900, they're in Indian Territory. When did they move? But luckily, Nancy had stated in that pension in 1915 that she submitted that she had been in the country, meaning there in Oklahoma, for 23 years. And Richard had been a farmer. He farmed until his death in 1911. And then she lived another 13 years and died in 1924. She is one of our ancestors out of this Texas bunch who actually has a photo, and I love the photo of her. We actually have a couple photos of her. One is, I'm thinking it's about 1915, and she's in this long black dress. It was definitely not stylish. So she's much older here, and it was probably the style back in the 1880s or something. And I've wondered even if it was taken on the day of her husband's funeral, maybe like when he died at the cemetery. We just don't know for sure. I thought maybe she was in mourning because it sort of looks like that. And it's a very conservative style, but it fits with the era and her role as the matriarch of the family, which, could be the reason for the photo. Now let's have a word from our sponsor. Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree research? While census records provide important details, they often don't tell the full story. That's where newspapers.com comes in. With over 1 billion pages of historical newspapers, it offers a treasure trove of stories that bring your ancestors' lives into sharper focus. Imagine covering an obituary that lists every surviving family member, an article about your great-grandfather's championship bowling league, or even a rare photograph you've never seen before. These local newspaper clippings reveal the everyday moments and personal details that make your family history truly come alive. Searching is simple. Just enter a name and location to connect with your family's untold stories. Break through those walls and add rich stories to your research. Visit newspapers.com/familylockup for 20% off a subscription today.
Wow, I'm just looking at the picture of Nancy Briscoe Frazier and thinking about what you said, that she could have been mourning and, she is wearing that black dress, or it looks dark at least in the black and white or sepia photo. But there does seem to be like maybe a cross in the background there. I don't know if that's just accidental, or there's definitely a barbed wire fence. So she could just be on her land, but maybe that's the fence surrounding the cemetery. I thought that was a good guess, that maybe she is at the cemetery.
I agree. That does look like a cross.
They have a lot of those Woodmen of the World memorials at the cemetery. And one of those pieces of wood in the background looks like it could be the same shape. I wonder, who knows? Maybe she's on her land. But I loved what you said about her dress not being stylish. It's a loosely, I would say, an unfitted dress with like a collar, very matronly looking.
Absolutely, especially for 1915, right?
Yes, she was definitely elderly at the time. So
I think
going
you're
more for
right.
comfort than anything
Yes.
else.
I think that is a Woodman of the World back there because it has that unique angle at the top. That is
Right?
so interesting. That very well could be the cemetery that we visited over 100 years later.
It is pretty intriguing to think about that possibility. And why else would she have a photo taken by herself? It is interesting to think about that, because there is another photo of her with her grandchildren, and she has her rocking chair and she's wearing, I don't know, do you think that's the same dress? It has a collar. It looks different. No, it's a different dress. She's wearing a little bit of a nicer dress, I would say, in the one with her grandchildren. But yeah, it makes you wonder, like, what was the occasion of this photo of her by herself in a field?
Agreed. I think she looks older there too than in the one with the grandchildren.
True.
So
Yeah.
maybe they just took it a little bit later in her life. We don't know. You just can only guess, right? But I guess it was maybe between 1910 and 1924, which is a big span. But I don't know, maybe further research and looking at other cemetery photos could help to figure that out. It's an idea.
Yeah. Well, I put the photo in ChatGPT and said, analyze this photo, and it couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman in the picture. I thought that was kind of strange because
Mhm.
obviously wearing a dress.
Yeah.
But it did say that the time of year looks like very dry. And so it could be late summer to early fall because the vegetation looks dry. And that's kind of true.
Yes, it is. That is true.
It is something to consider also, is the time of year that the photo was taken. And we could look and see, when Richard Frazier died, if that was in the fall or when it was. I guess we'll talk about that now. So, talking more about the cemetery. Well, I loved visiting the Burneyville Cemetery. I'm glad that you got to go too. So let's give our listeners some background on this. The Burneyville Cemetery is one cemetery within Love County, Oklahoma, and it's the final resting place for Richard Frazier and Nancy Briscoe Frazier, as well as two of their children, Cologne and Edmund Thomas Frazier. And many of their 11 children and numerous grandchildren lived nearby during the early 1900s. In our very favorite photo of Nancy, she's pictured with two of her grandchildren, Belle Harris. She's my great great grandmother, and Bert Harris, Eddie's brother. And their mother, Alice Frazier, was one of the youngest Frazier children. So this photo may have been taken at the time of Richard Frazier's death in 1911. Bert would have been 6 and Eddie would have been 4. And Richard and Nancy's headstones in the Burneyville Cemetery reveal more about them. Nancy's reads, Mother, Nancy Frazier, February 15th, 1847 to January 30th, 1924. She was the sunshine of our home. So that was a nice tombstone. So Nancy's headstone was likely erected much later than 1924 by her children, likely at the same time as her sons, which are in the same style. So Edmund Thomas and Cologne Frazier, their headstones are also there. Now, Richard's headstone is older, and it was likely erected at the time of his death in 1911. It reads, R. Frazier, born March 12th, 1840, died January 13th, 1911. The best, the dearest favorite of the sky must taste that cup, for man is born to die. So it's neat that they each had a little saying at the bottom of their headstone. Then on his headstone, the symbols of the open gate, dove, and rays of light are Christian imagery depicting the deceased soul being welcomed into heaven and passing through pearly gates. The poem and the symbols were very common in the early 20th century for headstones.
Yeah, it's always fun to look at the symbols and the lettering, the phrasing. It gives you such insight into this family. And so it makes you realize that, for one thing, that they were religious. Putting that on there would not have been inexpensive. That was important to have that symbol of the open gate, dove, and ray of light. And I just love the little phrases that they put there on both of them. It's just so neat. So, yeah, it was great visiting that cemetery. And I was so happy to see that it was well kept. The grass was cut. It was kind of wet and soggy. They get a lot of rain there. And so my shoes did get all muddy, but there was grass in between. So it was fun. And beautiful trees out, very rural. I imagine it's looked that way for 100 years. Probably not as well kept up with the grass, though, back in the day, when it was probably harder to mow the lawn. It was fun.
Yeah, and I thought that was such good insight about Nancy's headstone being in the style of her son's and therefore not being placed at 1924, but much later. So that was really good to notice that and to think about this looks like a much more modern headstone. Like it was probably placed in the 1950s.
Well, and looking at the death date of those two Frazier boys, one died 1963 and one 1952. So I'm even guessing 1960s, at the time of the 1963 death of Edmund. Maybe at that point, they said, okay, let's get headstones for everybody. Because not only is the style the same, the lettering, the Frazier name is exactly
Mm.
the same. It's
Hmm.
all capitals and it's special letters. I can't even think of how to describe that for our listeners,
It's
but
outlined.
outlined. Yeah, it's outlined. It's the same lettering style. And Nancy got a little special stuff because hers says mother and hers has she was the sunshine of our home phrase, whereas the two sons only say at rest. So, yeah, I
Hmm.
think I'm guessing, 1963, 1964 was when they erected those, which
Oh, you
makes
know
sense.
what? That makes sense. And it could have been later even because I just realized that our our John C. Harris is buried there and his headstone completely broke and is illegible now.
Mm.
And I want to put a new headstone there for him. And so it would probably look like that. It would be very modern looking. So these could be ones that have been recently placed because we know that at that time period, they were doing kind of these like thin concrete obelisks that were prone to breaking in the 1910s. Like when John C. Harris died, it was 1918. And so if that was the style they were doing when Nancy died, she probably had that and then it broke and then they replaced it.
That probably is right. Yeah. We're lucky that her husband's Richard Frazier's still exists because that was early. And I think that's probably placed about that era, 1911. There's a lot of, what do you call it?
Marble.
Moss. Well, it's marble. And then there's, you can just tell it's old. It's kind of aged. So that one seems like it is likely more original.
Oh yeah, that looks original. And they had several like that in the cemetery that were marble and that seem to have stood the test of time. I
Mhm.
think there was an economic depression in the 1910s in the latter end. And after researching the Harrises in that time period and seeing John C. Harris's son, Doc, your second great grandfather, Doc Harris's fortunes dipped so low at the end of the 1910s decade that I feel like there wasn't money at that time, especially with World War One. And World War One is what prompted a lot of the recession for farmers because of the uncertainty of being able to sell their grains and whatnot that they're farming. But then also the influenza epidemic. And so people dying after like World War One and that in the next 5 to 10 years, there just maybe wasn't money to pay for a nicer headstone. So they, maybe had these more concrete, less expensive headstones that
That's a
didn't
good
last.
point. That's a good point. So maybe Nancy's was there by Richards, but it didn't last, and so they decided to replace it with a modern one. That's a really good point, and that's a good lesson about thinking about context and economics because it's not cheap to erect a headstone.
So true. Especially, I mean, Richard Frazier's is tall. I mean, it's almost as tall as like my 10-year-old. So it's not a small headstone. It's like a, what do you call that? I wouldn't say it's an obelisk, but it's definitely a
It's just upright.
larger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stands probably 2 or 3 feet tall. Yeah, so I think that that shows that the family at that time had money to do that, and there were a lot of children, and so perhaps they pooled their money and were able to pay for it.
It was a time of prosperity in the early 1900s there. A lot of people were buying land. Around that time is when Doc Harris bought a lot of land from the Chickasaw Nation, but sadly, towards the end of that decade, he had to sell it all. But anyway, so Doc Harris married Alice Frazier, and that's the connection between the Fraziers and the Harrises. So both of that couple's parents are buried here, except for Doc's mother was buried back in Texas because she died in childbirth. But Doc's father, John C. Harris, is also in that cemetery, and we need to get him a new headstone. And I will say that the Burneyville Cemetery is very well kept up by the people who live in the county there because um, it is really in the middle of nowhere. The town of Burneyville is very tiny. So they didn't have such a good group of the community coming to clean it every year. They have an annual cleaning event. If they didn't have that, it would be completely overgrown, with weeds and grass and stuff. And so they really do a good job with taking care of that cemetery in their county.
Absolutely. Yes, and it was nice for me because to find those, you had taken pictures of them with your phone and uploaded those to Google Photos, I believe. And so I had the coordinates and I could use my phone to just take me there. And it would be off sometimes by a couple of rows, but it got me in the general area. So that was really nice. And then also I had a map of the cemetery that someone had sent us years ago where they had mapped out all the family's graves. And that was really helpful. So, if one of you listeners knows where all the people are buried in the cemetery, draw a map. It's amazing to have that for people that want to go find them because we've all wandered cemeteries looking for headstones. And it's great if you've got some guidance somehow.
Yeah, and there are some great technology tools to help with this. You can put those coordinates right into Find a Grave, which I have done. And then if you use Billion Graves, that is built in directly to the app to have the coordinates there tagged, like it's within the picture, it's embedded in the photo. So Billion Graves, Find a Grave. And my husband's uncle, he visited a cemetery in Colorado where a bunch of the Dyers are buried. And he created a spreadsheet that has all of the rows and the numbers and where people are buried. And it's really great because I've done research and work on Bathsheba Tharp Dyer and never realized that she supposedly was buried in that cemetery according to some of the records he was working from that I didn't have access to. So when he shared that, I found out where Bathsheba Tharp was buried.
Oh my goodness.
She
That's
has no
so fun.
headstone. There's no headstone there for her, but it clearly says in the records that she was buried in the plot owned by her son, John
That's
James Dyer.
neat.
So that was cool.
That is neat. Well, let's shift focus a bit here and talk about the Love County Historical Society Pioneer Museum. And we love museums, and these local museums are so amazing for learning about what life was really like in our ancestors' day. So, this museum is such a good example of what it could be, if someone's just starting a museum. I loved that they had replicas of so many different things, like the ferry that was running to cross the Red River between Oklahoma and Texas. I didn't grow up in this area, and so a lot of these things were not familiar to me at all. And I loved that there was a little replica of Tuck's Ferry, and there was a newspaper display with articles about the ferry crossing. And I took pictures of all that. I was so interested in that because obviously all of my ancestors had to cross that river to get up to Indian Territory, and they would have all used a ferry. to load on the wagon and the horses and everything they had. So I learned a little bit more about it. The Frazier family, as I had figured out from the pension, that they had crossed the Red River, and they had been living in Cook County, Texas, which was across the border. And they would have moved up about 1892 and would have used one of these ferries. There were actually lots of different ferries that people operated. It was their living. They made money from that. And I learned a little bit about the Tuck ferry. And it could have been the very one used by the Frazier family because it was right there where they would have come up into Love County. So this early transportation was benefited by having so many ferries that operated and crossed the Red River, connecting the future Love County with markets in Texas. And one of the early operators was a John Martin Tuck, who owned a ferry located 8 miles southeast of Marietta. So that seemed like a likely ferry. We'll never know for sure, but it was really fun to look at the replica and think about it. So while I was at the museum, I was so happy to be able to spend some time with the curator, Lakita, and she is the driving force behind that museum. She's gathered pioneer items and had a whole research room full of information about the families of Love County. She showed me a scrapbook of obituaries, and I scanned through that, and I found one for Colin Frazier, Nancy's son, one of the ones we talked about his headstone. He died in 1952. So she had amazing records that she had collected or people had given to her. I could have spent all day, and I think you did spend a lot of time in the museum, didn't you, Nicole, when you were there?
I did, and I wish I would have had more time to spend there. It was just full of delightful things and original photos, old records, and so much of it was relevant to my Harris research project that I was doing for my kinship determination project for my certification portfolio. And so I was just taking pictures of everything, and she had some pictures of Ettie Belle Harris even. It was so fun. I was like, how do you have these pictures? And she had just gone around gathering photos from people for the museum. And it just seems like the county had really supported her efforts over the years. And there were a lot of people that were contributors who would subscribe to like a newsletter that she made. And then they would donate money monthly and stuff to help with gathering items and maintaining things and getting a nicer place. They used to be in like a train depot, and then they were able to build a newer building. So the museum was just really a fascinating place. She had gathered some really cool old volumes, like a jail admission volume, which actually had our ancestor in it, Doc Harris, because he had been transporting liquor, which Oklahoma was a dry state when it was first formed, and so wasn't allowed to have alcohol, and he had some alcohol, and so he went to jail for a couple days. So that was kind of a funny thing to find. I wasn't expecting, didn't really know at the time when I saw that about Oklahoma being a dry state for the first several years. So it was definitely a lesson in history for me.
Well, I agree. And it's just amazing to find your ancestors in things like that. That was so fun. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I took lots of pictures and wandered around and looked through books and spent time with Lakita. I'm just so appreciative of people that this becomes their life work, that they devote their time and all their energy into creating resources like this. So if any of our listeners, if you are visiting someplace where your ancestors lived, be sure and check it out and see if there is a museum there that could at least give you a feel for what it was like. I know I've talked before about visiting the Cassia County, Idaho Historical Museum, and I grew up there, but for me, even going back and going through it, I learned things. And so there's just nothing like a museum to help you learn about your ancestors. So fun.
So great. Well, thanks everyone for listening. We hope you have a great week, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our books, Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro with DNA on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our online courses or study groups of the same names. Learn more at familylocket.com/services. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our courses. To get updates in your email inbox each Monday, subscribe to our newsletter at familylocket.com/newsletter. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We read each review and are so thankful for them. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.